The evening lights of Manhattan sparkled like scattered diamonds against the darkening sky as Robert Chen stood in his penthouse office, his reflection staring back at him from the floor-to-ceiling windows. At 45, he had everything money could buy: a successful tech company worth billions, a luxurious lifestyle that most people only dreamed of, and a family that, until recently, he thought made his life complete. But lately, something had changed. His heart raced every time he thought about Jessica, his 28-year-old marketing director. Her fresh ideas, her enthusiasm for life, and the way she looked at him with admiration had awakened feelings he thought were long buried. It wasn't just her youthful beauty that drew him in. It was how she made him feel, young, powerful, and alive again. As he loosened his designer tie, his thoughts drifted to Anna, his wife of 20 years. They had met in college when they were both ambitious students with big dreams. She had stood by him through the tough early years, eating instant noodles in their tiny apartment, believing in his vision when nobody else did. Together, they had built not just a fortune, but a family, 4 wonderful boys who were the spitting image of him. His phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. You're making the right choice." Robert's stomach tightened as he thought about the divorce papers sitting in his briefcase. He had chosen tonight, their wedding anniversary, to tell Anna. Some might call it cruel, but in his mind, it was a clean break, like removing a bandage in one swift motion. The elevator ride to the restaurant felt longer than usual. Anna was already there, wearing the blue dress he had given her last Christmas. Her face lit up when she saw him, just like it had for the past 20 years. She had aged gracefully, but next to Jessica's youthful energy, their life together suddenly felt tired. "Happy anniversary, darling," Anna said, reaching for his hand across the table. The candlelight caught the diamond on her wedding ring, the same modest ring from when they first married. He had offered to upgrade it many times as their wealth grew, but she always refused, saying its sentimental value was worth more than any diamond. The waiter brought their favorite wine, a ritual they had maintained through 2 decades of anniversary dinners. But tonight, Robert barely touched his glass. "Is everything okay?" Anna asked, her intuition, honed by years of marriage, picking up on his unusual behavior. "You've been distant lately. Is it work?" Robert took a deep breath. The restaurant's soft music seemed to fade away as he reached for his briefcase. "Anna, we need to talk." He watched as confusion crossed her face, followed by recognition, and then, the worst, understanding. She knew him too well not to read the signs. "It's someone else, isn't it?" Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she set down her wine glass. "I've changed," he said, the rehearsed words feeling hollow. "We've changed. I need something different in my life now." "Different?" Anna's eyes glistened. "Like your marketing director? Did you think I wouldn't notice how you look at her during company events?" Robert slid the envelope across the table, its weight seeming to grow with each inch. "I've been fair with the settlement. You and the boys will be well taken care of." Hannah didn't touch the envelope. Instead, she looked around the restaurant, at the other happy couples enjoying their dinners, at the flowers he had arranged to be placed at their table, at the life they had built together. "The boys," she said softly. "Have you thought about how this will affect them? James is preparing for college. Michael just made the basketball team. Alex and David, they idolize you." "They'll understand eventually," Robert said, though doubt crept into his voice. "They're old enough to know that sometimes people grow apart." Anna finally picked up the envelope but didn't open it. 20 years ago, we sat in that cheap Italian restaurant 3 blocks from campus. You proposed with a ring you had saved up for months to buy, promising we'd face everything together. Was that man lying, or has money changed you so much that you can't even recognize him anymore? Her words hit harder than he expected. The man in that Italian restaurant felt like a stranger now, young, idealistic, believing that love could conquer anything. That man hadn't known what it felt like to have real power, to have young, beautiful women look at him with desire, rather than seeing him as just a provider and father. "I'll always care about you and the boys," he said, reaching for his wallet to pay the bill. "But I need to do this for me. I deserve to be happy." Anna stood up, her dignity intact despite the public setting. "You know what's ironic? You've given me everything except the one thing I actually wanted, the man I married. She placed her wedding ring on the table. I hope she's worth it. As Anna walked away, Robert felt a strange mix of relief and loss. Through the restaurant window, he could see her getting into a taxi, her head held high. He pulled out his phone to text Jessica but stopped. For a moment, he saw his reflection in the dark screen, a successful billionaire about to start a new life, yet somehow looking smaller than the struggling student who had once promised forever over cheap wine and breadsticks. The maitre d' approached with a concerned look. Is everything all right, Mr. Chen? Should I cancel the anniversary dessert we prepared? Robert nodded, suddenly unable to speak. As he gathered his things to leave, he noticed Anna had left the envelope of divorce papers behind. Even in this final moment, she had managed to make him feel like he was the one losing something priceless. Outside, the Manhattan night had turned cool. Robert loosened his tie further, feeling like he could finally breathe. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Jessica, full of heart emojis and promises of their exciting future together. He got into his waiting car, instructing his driver to take him home. As they pulled away from the curb, he caught a glimpse of the restaurant window where he and Anna had shared so many anniversary dinners. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. But then he thought of Jessica's smile, of the way she made him feel, of the new life waiting for him. He was Robert Chen, a self-made billionaire. He had built an empire from nothing, and now he would build a new life too. The cost, his marriage, his family's stability, his son's trust, seemed high, but he convinced himself it was worth it. After all, he told himself, don't all great achievements require sacrifice? Little did he know, as his car disappeared into the Manhattan traffic, that this night would mark the beginning of a journey that would force him to redefine what truly matters in life, and that sometimes the things we throw away turn out to be the most valuable of all. The morning after the devastating anniversary dinner, Anna sat at her kitchen island, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of her. The house felt unusually quiet, though she could hear her sons moving around upstairs, getting ready for school. She hadn't slept all night, but somehow she felt surprisingly clear-headed. The boys didn't know yet. How do you tell your children that their father has chosen a new life over the family he built? The thought made her stomach clench, but she straightened her spine. She had always taught her sons to face challenges head-on, and now she needed to lead by example. Mom? It was Thomas, her eldest at 17, standing in the doorway. He looked so much like his father, the same strong jawline, the same calculating eyes. Did Dad come home last night? Before she could answer, Peter, 16, came bounding down the stairs with his basketball under his arm. Behind him were the younger two, Chris, 15, and William, 14. All four boys had inherited their father's distinctive features, like copies made at slightly different ages. Guys, Anna said softly, we need to talk. They gathered around the kitchen island, sensing the gravity in their mother's voice. She looked at each of them. Thomas, already showing the leadership qualities that would make him a great doctor someday. Peter, whose engineering mind could take apart and rebuild anything. Chris, who argued like a lawyer even at 15. And William, who could code better than most adults. Your father, she paused, choosing her words carefully, has decided to make some changes in his life. He's going to be living separately from us for a while. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas's hand tightened around his coffee mug. Peter's basketball dropped to the floor, rolling unnoticed under the counter. Chris's face turned red, while William just stared at his hands. It's because of her, isn't it? Thomas asked, his voice tight. The marketing director who keeps showing up at all the company events. Anna felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. Her boys were perceptive, just like their father used to be. Yes, she answered honestly. Your father thinks he needs something different in his life now. Different? Peter exploded, jumping up from his stool. He needs a girlfriend half his age. That's just. He couldn't finish, his voice choking with emotion. Chris, always the analytical one, asked, what's going to happen to us? To the house? To everything? Nothing is going to happen to us, Anna said firmly. We're going to stay right here in our home. Your father has offered a very generous settlement. Of course he did, Thomas interrupted bitterly. He thinks he can just buy us off like one of his company acquisitions. Listen to me, Anna said, her voice gentle but firm. Your father made a choice that hurt us, but we're not going to let it define us. You're all old enough to understand that sometimes people change, sometimes they make mistakes, and sometimes they have to live with the consequences of their choices. William, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. Does he not love us anymore? Anna's heart broke at the vulnerability in her youngest son's voice. She walked around the island and pulled him into a hug. Your father loves you very much. This isn't about not loving you. This is about him losing his way. Well, I don't want to see him, Peter declared, picking up his basketball. He can keep his money and his new girlfriend. I don't need either. I understand you're angry, Anna said, and you have every right to be. But don't let that anger consume you. Use it to fuel something positive. Show him, show everyone, what kind of men you're becoming. Thomas stood up, his jaw set in determination. Mom's right. We don't need his money. I can get a scholarship for medical school. I'll work part-time if I have to. And I can tutor coding on weekends, William added, his voice stronger now. I already have some students from school asking for help. Anna looked at her boys with fierce pride. In just one conversation, they were already showing more maturity than their father had in making his decision. We're going to be okay, she said, believing it for the first time since last night. We have each other, and that's what matters. The doorbell rang, making them all jump. A courier stood outside with a thick envelope, more divorce papers, no doubt. Anna signed for it but left it unopened on the counter. You should all get ready for school, she said, checking the time. Life goes on, and we go with it. As the boys gathered their things, she noticed them standing a little straighter, their shoulders a little squarer. They had their father's looks, but they had her strength, something she was only now fully realizing herself. Later that afternoon, Anna sat in her lawyer's office, the unopened envelope in front of her. Her lawyer, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, looked at her with concern. He's offering you the house, full custody, and a substantial monthly payment, the lawyer explained after reviewing the documents. He's being more than generous with the settlement. Anna smiled sadly. He's trying to buy his freedom with guilt money. But I don't want more than what's fair for the boys. They need to learn that integrity matters more than money. Are you sure? Her lawyer asked. You could ask for much more. The prenup becomes void if there's infidelity, and we have evidence. No, Anna interrupted firmly. I won't drag this through the courts. I won't let my boys see their parents tear each other apart. They need to learn how to handle difficult situations with dignity. As she drove home that evening, Anna passed the Italian restaurant where Robert had proposed 20 years ago. It was still there, its warm lights inviting couples inside to share their dreams over pasta and wine. She thought about the young woman she had been, sitting across from a man who promised her the world. He had delivered on that promise in terms of material wealth, but somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of what really mattered. Walking into her quiet house, Anna found a note on the kitchen counter. Her boys had made dinner, pasta, slightly overcooked, with sauce from a jar. Next to the plate was a hand-drawn card. We love you, Mom. We've got this. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. Her sons were showing her that even in their pain, they could choose to act with love. Maybe that was the greatest lesson in all of this, that true character shows not in how life treats you, but in how you respond to life's challenges. She sat down to eat the slightly mushy pasta, made with love by her boys, and felt stronger than she had in years. Robert might have left for a younger woman, but he had no idea what he was really leaving behind, a family that would grow stronger through adversity, 4 sons who would learn what real manhood looks like, and a woman who was rediscovering her own strength day by day. 6 months flew by like pages torn from a calendar. Robert stood in his new Silicon Valley mansion, adjusting his bow tie in front of a mirror that cost more than his first car. Outside, an army of wedding planners transformed his sprawling backyard into what Jessica called a modern fairy tale wonderland. The wedding would be featured in several high-profile magazines. Jessica had made sure of that. Everything was perfect, from the imported flowers to the crystal champagne flutes. Everything except the empty seats in the front row, where his family should have been sitting. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Can't make it. Prep for college entrance exams. Good luck with everything. Short, polite, distant. Robert stared at the message, remembering how his eldest son used to send in long, excited texts about his day, his dreams of becoming a doctor, his high school achievements. The other boys hadn't responded to the wedding invitation at all. Peter had blocked his number after the divorce. Chris returned all his letters unopened. William, his youngest, only communicated through his mother when absolutely necessary. Robert told himself they just needed time, that they were being typical teenagers, that they would understand when they were older. "Darling, are you ready?" Jessica appeared in the doorway, radiant in her designer wedding gown. At 28, she practically glowed with youth and excitement. "The photographer wants to take some pre-ceremony shots." Robert forced a smile, tucking his phone away. "You look beautiful," he said, and she did. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembered another bride, 20 years ago, looking just as beautiful in a simple dress she had saved up for months to buy. The ceremony was extravagant, just as Jessica had wanted. Business moguls, celebrities, and tech industry leaders filled the seats where his family should have been. As he said his vows, Robert couldn't help but notice how many of his guests were on their second or third marriages. In Silicon Valley, trading up seemed as common as trading stocks. Later, during the reception, Robert checked his phone again. This time there was a message from Anna with a photo attached. His heart skipped a beat when he opened it. It showed their 4 boys at Peter's basketball game. They were all smiling, their faces so similar to his own at their ages that it almost hurt to look at them. The message read, "Thought you'd want to see this. Peter made the winning shot. He's being scouted by college teams." "Who's that from?" Jessica asked, appearing at his shoulder in a cloud of expensive perfume. She had changed into her reception dress, another masterpiece that probably cost more than most people's cars. "No one important," Robert said, quickly putting the phone away. "Just business." Jessica smiled, but something flickered in her eyes. "You know, I think it's better if you don't dwell on the past. We're starting fresh, remember? New life, new beginnings." She took his hand, leading him toward their guests. "Come on, the tech reporter from the Valley News wants an exclusive." The months that followed settled into a routine. Robert threw himself into his work, expanding his tech empire while Jessica managed their social life. They traveled the world in their private jet, dined at exclusive restaurants, and attended glamorous parties. From the outside, their life looked perfect. But late at night, when Jessica was asleep, Robert would often find himself in his home office, scrolling through social media to catch glimpses of his sons' lives. Thomas got accepted into 3 top medical schools. Peter broke his high school's basketball scoring record. Chris won a prestigious debate competition. William developed an app that was gaining attention in the tech community. He sent money, of course. Large checks for birthdays and holidays, generous deposits into their college funds. But money couldn't buy him access to their lives. His text messages went unanswered. His emails received brief, formal replies, if any. When he tried to visit during Christmas, Anna gently told him the boys had other plans. "They're doing so well," he told Jessica one evening after seeing Thomas's college acceptance post. "Maybe we should invite them to stay for a weekend. The house has plenty of room and—" "Honey," Jessica interrupted, not looking up from her social media feed. "I thought we agreed to focus on our future, not your past. Besides, teenagers can be so difficult. They'll probably just make things awkward." Robert nodded, swallowing his protest. Jessica was right, wasn't she? The boys were nearly grown now. They had their own lives. They didn't need him hovering around, trying to make up for lost time. Still, every time he saw a father and son playing catch in the park or having lunch together, something tightened in his chest. One day, while reviewing acquisition documents for his latest tech venture, Robert received an unexpected email from William's computer science teacher. His youngest son had developed a revolutionary coding algorithm, something that could potentially transform the industry. The teacher thought Robert would be proud. Excited to finally have a connection point, Robert immediately tried to call William. The call went to voicemail. He sent a text. "Heard about your coding breakthrough. That's incredible, son. Would love to discuss it with you. Maybe I could mentor you." The reply came hours later. "Thanks, but I already have mentors. Mom's new friend Paul has been helping me. He's a computer science professor." Paul. The name hit Robert like a punch to the gut. He had heard through business contacts that Anna had started dating a university professor, but he hadn't realized how involved the man had become in his sons' lives. That night, at another glamorous Silicon Valley party, Robert stood among the elite of the tech world. Beautiful people in expensive clothes discussed market trends and startup valuations. Jessica hung on his arm, charming everyone with her youth and vitality. But for the first time, he felt every one of his 50 years. "Are you okay?" Jessica asked, noticing his distraction. "You seem far away." "Just thinking about a new project," he lied, forcing a smile. But the truth was, he was thinking about 4 empty chairs at his wedding, about basketball games he never saw, about science fairs he missed, and about a coding prodigy who would rather learn from a stranger than his own father. As he raised his champagne glass for yet another toast, Robert caught his reflection in the window. He saw what everyone else saw, a successful billionaire with a beautiful young wife, living the dream. But somewhere, in a different city, 4 young men who shared his face were living their lives without him, achieving their dreams without him, becoming men without him. And for the first time since he'd left his family, Robert wondered if his new beginning had come at too high a price. The New York Tech Summit was the biggest industry event of the year. Robert adjusted his designer suit as he waited backstage, reviewing his keynote speech one last time. 5 years had passed since the divorce, and he had doubled his fortune in that time. Today, he would announce his company's groundbreaking artificial intelligence platform to an audience of industry leaders and potential investors. 2 minutes, Mr. Chen, a young event coordinator said, poking her head through the curtain. Robert nodded, straightening his tie. Jessica had wanted to come, but he convinced her to stay in California. These days, he found himself wanting more time alone, away from her constant social media updates and endless party planning. The lights dimmed, and the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Please welcome our keynote speaker, tech visionary and CEO of Future Dynamics, Robert Chen." As he walked onto the stage, the applause was deafening. The massive auditorium was packed with the who's who of the tech world. Robert began his well-rehearsed speech, clicking through his presentation slides with practiced ease. "The future isn't just about innovation," he said, his voice confident. "It's about understanding human potential and—" That's when he saw them. 4 young men sitting in the middle of the auditorium, their faces illuminated by the stage lights. At first, he thought he was seeing things, maybe reflections or tricks of the light. But as his eyes adjusted, his heart nearly stopped. In those 4 faces, he saw himself at different ages. The same sharp jawline, the same distinctive nose, the same penetrating gray eyes. His sons had grown into carbon copies of his younger self, their presence commanding attention even in the crowded room. Thomas, now 22, sat with perfect posture, his medical school textbook open on his lap. Peter, 21, had grown taller than the others, his athletic build evident even in his business casual attire. Chris, 20, wore a law student's focused expression, while William, 19, typed rapidly on a sleek laptop. Robert's voice faltered for a moment. He looked down at his speech, words about technological progress and market dominance, and suddenly it all felt hollow. "As I was saying," he continued, his mouth dry, understanding human potential. He glanced at his sons again. They weren't looking at him with anger or hatred. Instead, their expression showed something that hit him even harder: indifference. The rest of his speech passed in a blur. His mind kept drifting to memories: teaching Thomas to ride a bike, attending Peter's first basketball game, helping Chris build his science fair project, watching William write his first line of code. As he wrapped up his presentation, the audience erupted in applause. Tech journalists rushed forward, their questions blending into a meaningless buzz. Through the crowd, he saw his sons standing up, gathering their things. "Wait," he called out, forgetting the microphone was still on. The sound echoed through the auditorium, making several people jump. His sons paused, turning toward the stage with synchronized movement that made his chest tighten. Robert fumbled, suddenly aware that hundreds of eyes were on him. "Thank you all for coming," he finished lamely, handing the microphone to a confused event organizer. He rushed through the crowd, ignoring the hands reaching out to congratulate him, the business cards being thrust in his direction. But by the time he reached their row, his sons were already heading toward the exit. Robert followed them into the lobby, his security team trailing behind uncertainly. The boys stood near the entrance, talking quietly among themselves. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. They looked exactly like the photos he kept in his desk drawer, photos from his college years, when he was still hungry for success but hadn't lost his way. "You've all grown so much," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They turned to face him. Thomas spoke first, his voice measured and professional. "Good presentation, Father. Your AI platform seems promising." "Thanks, Robert struggled to find words. "I didn't know you were interested in tech conferences." "William's startup is being featured in the Innovation Showcase," Peter explained, his tone making it clear this information wasn't offered as an invitation for further conversation. "A startup?" Robert's eyes widened. "That's incredible. I could help, you know. I have connections." "I've already secured funding," William interrupted quietly. "Mom's friend Paul introduced me to some ethical investors." The word ethical hung in the air like an accusation. Robert remembered the countless times he'd chosen profit over principles, including the choice that had cost him his family. "Look," Chris said, checking his watch, "we should go. Our panel discussion starts in 10 minutes. "Panel discussion?" Robert asked, desperate to keep the conversation going. "Young innovators shaping tomorrow's technology," William replied. "I'm speaking about responsible AI development." Robert felt a twist in his gut. His own AI platform, which he just announced, had some ethically questionable features that Jessica had convinced him to include for profit maximization. "Maybe we could grab dinner after," he suggested, knowing the answer before they spoke. "We're having dinner with Mom and Paul," Thomas said. "It's their engagement celebration." The news hit Robert like a physical blow. Paul, the professor who had been mentoring William, the man who had stepped into the role he had abandoned, was going to become his son's stepfather. "I'm happy for her," he managed to say, though the words tasted bitter. His sons nodded politely, the gesture so similar to his own business meeting habits that it hurt. They turned to leave, their expensive but understated clothes making them stand out among the flashy tech crowd. "You know," Thomas paused, looking back, "Mom never talked badly about you. She told us to form our own opinions, and we have." With that, they walked away, leaving Robert standing alone in the crowded lobby. Around him, people were taking photos, trying to capture the moment the great Robert Chen seemed to freeze in place, watching 4 younger versions of himself disappear into the crowd. His phone buzzed, Jessica sending him photos of their new yacht. But Robert couldn't tear his eyes away from the direction his sons had gone. In their straight backs and confident strides, he saw not just his own features, but the best parts of who he used to be, before wealth and ego had blinded him to what really mattered. A young reporter approached, notebook in hand. "Mr. Chen, can you tell us more about your AI platform's market projections?" Robert stared at him blankly. How could he think about market projections when he'd just witnessed the true cost of his choices? His sons hadn't just grown up to look like him, they had grown up to be better than him, and he hadn't been there to see it happen. After his keynote speech, Robert sat alone in the conference center's VIP lounge, his untouched coffee growing cold. The room buzzed with notifications from his phone, messages from Jessica, his business partners, tech journalists, all wanting to discuss his AI announcement. He ignored them all, his mind replaying the image of his 4 sons walking away. A gentle knock on the door startled him. "Come in," he called out, expecting his assistant with more press inquiries. Instead, Thomas stepped inside, followed by his brothers. Robert stood up so quickly he almost knocked over his coffee cup. "We thought we should talk," Thomas said, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone Robert used in board meetings. "Properly, this time." The boys, no, young men now, arranged themselves on the leather couches across from their father. Their resemblance to him was even more striking in the quiet room. It was like looking at a time-lapse of his own youth. "Your AI presentation was impressive," William spoke first, his fingers absently tapping on his laptop. "Though I noticed some concerning elements in the privacy architecture." Robert felt a surge of pride mixed with shame. His youngest son had grown into exactly the kind of tech expert he'd hoped for, but had developed an ethical backbone that made him question his father's choices. "How's medical school, Thomas?" Robert asked, trying to steer the conversation towards safer ground. I'm specializing in pediatric oncology, Thomas replied. Working with kids who are fighting battles they didn't choose. The subtle dig wasn't lost on Robert. Peter, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. Let's not pretend this is a casual catch-up, Father. We're here because we need to clear the air. Chris nodded, pulling out a small notebook, a habit he picked up in law school. We've had 5 years to think about what we want to say to you. 5 years of watching Mom rebuild her life while you sent checks instead of showing up. Robert felt his throat tighten. I know I've made mistakes. Mistakes? Peter interrupted, his voice sharp but controlled. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. You walked out on 20 years of family for a woman younger than Thomas. I never stopped loving you boys, Robert protested weakly. Love isn't just a feeling, Father, Thomas said, using the formal title deliberately. It's a choice you make every day. And every day for the past 5 years, you chose something else. William opened his laptop, turning it to show a spreadsheet. I've tracked every attempt you made to contact us. 68 text messages, 23 emails, and 15 voicemails in 5 years. That's less communication than you have with your board members in a single week. Robert stared at the data, his tech mogul's mind automatically analyzing the patterns. The numbers painted a damning picture of his priorities. But you sent money, Chris added, consulting his notebook. Regular deposits, expensive gifts, offers to invest in our projects. You tried to buy back what you threw away. That's not fair, Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. I wanted to give you every advantage. We already had every advantage, Thomas cut in. We had a mother who showed us that integrity matters more than income. We had each other. We learned that real success isn't measured in stock prices. Peter stood up, pacing the room with the restless energy of an athlete. You know what's ironic? Your abandonment taught us more about being men than your presence ever did. We learned from watching Mom handle betrayal with grace. We learned from seeing her choose dignity over revenge. And Paul? Robert couldn't help asking. How do you feel about him marrying your mother? The brothers exchanged looks. It was Chris who answered, his legal training evident in his measured response. Paul taught us that real strength isn't about power or money. It's about showing up, being consistent, earning trust. He never tried to replace you. He didn't have to. He just filled the space you left with something better. William closed his laptop with a quiet click. He helped me develop my startup's ethical framework. Never asked for anything in return. Never tried to leverage his help for control. Robert felt each word like a physical blow. He thought about Jessica, who was probably posting photos of their new yacht on social media right now, who had never once asked about his son's lives. I see how successful you've all become, he said softly. I'm proud of you. That's the thing, Father, Thomas replied, standing up. Your pride doesn't mean what it used to. We built our lives without it. Peter stopped pacing, turning to face him. We didn't come here to hurt you or seek revenge. We came to show you what you walked away from. Not broken children, not angry teenagers, but men who learned from your biggest mistake. And what was that? Robert asked, though he already knew the answer. Thinking that success means upgrading your life like it's a software update, Chris said. Newer model, better features, delete the old version. William stood up last, tucking his laptop into his bag. Your AI platform promises to revolutionize decision-making, Father. But the most important decisions in life can't be calculated by algorithms. They're made by the heart. The four brothers moved toward the door, their movements synchronized in a way that spoke of years growing up together, years Robert had missed. Wait, he called out, just as Thomas reached for the handle. Can we try to rebuild something? His sons turned back one last time. Their faces, so like his own, showed not anger or hatred, but something that hurt even more, peaceful indifference. You know what Mom always says? Thomas asked. Life isn't about the mistakes you make, it's about how you fix them, but fixing things requires more than just wanting to. It requires work, time, consistency, all the things you traded for your new life. The door isn't locked, Father, Chris added. But you'll have to learn what we learned, that real relationships can't be bought, sold, or upgraded. They can only be earned. With that, they left the room, leaving Robert alone with his cold coffee and the weight of every choice he'd made. Through the window, He watched them exit the building together, four strong young men who carried his features but their mother's values. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Jessica complaining about how boring California was without him. Robert stared at the message, seeing for the first time how shallow his new life had become. He had traded substance for surface, wisdom for youth, love for luxury. And watching his sons walk away, successful and strong despite his absence, Robert realized that he hadn't just lost his family 5 years ago. He had lost the chance to become the kind of man his sons had grown up to be. The flight back to California felt longer than usual. Robert sat in his private jet, surrounded by luxury, but feeling emptier than ever. The meeting with his sons kept playing in his mind like a movie he couldn't stop watching. He pulled out his phone and opened the photo gallery, scrolling back 5 years to the last family photos he had. "Would you like another drink, sir?" the flight attendant asked. "No, thank you," he replied, his eyes fixed on a photo of the boys at their last family vacation. They had been so young then, their faces still soft with childhood. Now they were men, their features hardened into mature versions of his own. When he landed, Jessica was waiting in their mansion's driveway, looking exactly as she had when he first met her, young, beautiful, and focused entirely on appearances. She was taking selfies next to their new sports car. "Finally, you're home," she exclaimed, kissing his cheek. "You won't believe what happened at the charity gala last night. Everyone was talking about our new yacht, and Mrs. Anderson was so jealous she—" "Not now," Robert cut her off, walking past her into the house. He could feel her surprise. He had never dismissed her like this before. "What's wrong with you?" She followed him inside. "Is it the AI platform? Did something go wrong at the conference?" Robert stood in their massive living room, looking at the expensive art on the walls, pieces chosen by their interior decorator for their investment value rather than any personal meaning. "I saw my sons." Jessica's expression flickered. "Oh, well, that's nice. Did they want something? Money for their projects?" "They wanted nothing from me," he said quietly. "That's the point. They've built their lives without me. Thomas is becoming a pediatric oncologist. Peter's being scouted by pro basketball teams. Chris is in law school. And William's created an AI startup that makes mine look morally bankrupt." "Honey," Jessica said, her voice taking on the condescending tone she used when she thought he was being dramatic, "they're just trying to make you feel guilty. You've given them everything. The best education, opportunities, financial security." "No," Robert interrupted, turning to face her. For the first time, he noticed how young she really was, young enough to be his daughter. Their mother gave them everything that matters. She gave them values, strength, dignity. "I just gave them money." Jessica's perfect smile faltered. "Why are you being like this? We have an amazing life. Look at everything we've built together." Robert laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Built? We haven't built anything. We've just spent money. Big difference." He walked to their floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the manicured gardens. "My sons, they've actually built things, real things. They've built character, careers that help people, relationships that mean something." "You're just upset because they don't worship you anymore," Jessica snapped, her youth showing in her impatience. "They're being ungrateful. After everything you've done." "Everything I've done." Robert turned back to her. "What exactly have I done, Jessica? Abandoned my family? Traded 20 years of marriage for a younger model? Tried to buy my children's love with expensive gifts?" She stared at him, her carefully maintained facade cracking. "Why are you saying these things? This isn't like you." "Maybe that's the problem," he said softly. "Maybe this isn't who I'm supposed to be." Later that night, Robert sat in his home office, looking at his son's social media profiles. Thomas had posted about a successful treatment for one of his young cancer patients. Peter had shared photos from a charity basketball game he'd organized for underprivileged kids. Chris had written an article about environmental law reform. William had given a TED talk about ethical AI development. His phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "The neighbors are having a party. We should make an appearance." He didn't reply. Instead, he opened his laptop and looked up Paul, the professor who was going to marry Anna. The man's university profile showed a modest office, walls lined with books. His published papers focused on using technology to help people, not just generate profit. His student reviews spoke of his patience, his wisdom, his willingness to mentor anyone who showed genuine interest. "Sir?" His house manager appeared at the door. "Ms. Jessica is asking if you'll be joining her at the neighbor's party." "No," Robert replied, not looking up from his screen. "Tell her to go without me." As the night grew later, Robert found himself looking at old family photos again. There was one from the boys' last birthday before the divorce, all four of them blowing out candles together, their faces full of joy. Anna was in the background, watching them with pride. He had been there too, but he'd been checking his phone, probably messaging Jessica. The realization hit him hard. He hadn't just left his family, he'd left himself. The man in that photo, distracted by the allure of something newer and younger, had no idea what he was about to lose. And now, 5 years later, that loss felt complete. His phone buzzed again, this time with a news alert. Williams' startup had just received major funding for its ethical AI initiative. The article mentioned that the young CEO had learned his values from his mother and his mentor, Professor Paul Wilson. Robert closed his laptop and walked to the window. The neighbor's party was in full swing, music and laughter floating across the perfectly maintained lawns. Jessica would be there, charming everyone with her youth and beauty, playing the role of the billionaire's trophy wife perfectly. But here he stood, alone in his massive house, surrounded by expensive things that suddenly meant nothing. He was 50 years old, and for the first time, he felt every year of it. Not because of age, but because of the weight of his choices. He thought about what Thomas had said, "Love isn't just a feeling, father. It's a choice you make every day." For 5 years, he had made the wrong choice every single day. And now, watching the party lights flicker in the distance, Robert Chen, billionaire tech mogul, industry pioneer, and father of 4 remarkable young men who wanted nothing to do with him, realized that his new beginning had become a dead end. His phone buzzed one more time. It was Jessica again. "Everyone's asking about you. Should I tell them you're working on another billion-dollar idea?" Robert stared at the message, seeing it for what it was, shallow, superficial, focused entirely on appearances, just like the life he had chosen, just like the man he had become. And in that moment, he understood what his sons had been trying to tell him. Success wasn't about upgrading to a newer model or accumulating more wealth. It was about the choices you make, the values you uphold, and the legacy you leave behind. He had failed at all 3. 2 weeks after the tech conference, Robert sat in his lawyer's office, signing divorce papers for the second time in 5 years. Jessica had been surprisingly accepting of the end. Perhaps she'd seen it coming even before he had. The settlement was generous but fair, nothing like the guilt-driven excess he'd offered Anna. "Are you sure about this?" his lawyer asked, watching him sign the last document. "The press will have a field day with this story." Robert placed the pen down carefully. "For the first time in years, I'm completely sure about something." Later that day, he walked into his company's board meeting with a new proposal. The board members exchanged concerned looks as he outlined his plan to restructure the company's priorities. "Ethical AI development isn't just good morality," he explained, standing at the head of the table. "It's good business. And I have proof." He pulled up Williams' company profile on the screen. "My son's startup has achieved in 1 year what we couldn't in 5 because they prioritized integrity over profit." One board member cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Mr. Chen, we're not running a charity." "No," Robert interrupted. "We're running a company that will shape the future. The question is, what kind of future do we want to shape?" The debate lasted hours, but in the end, Robert's passion won them over. As he left the office that evening, he passed the wall of magazine covers featuring his success story. He'd ordered a new one to be added, the recent article about Williams' ethical AI initiative. At home, he began the process of downsizing his life. The mansion went on the market, along with most of its expensive contents. He found a comfortable but modest apartment closer to the city, one that felt more like a home than a showpiece. One morning, as he was sorting through his belongings, he found an old photo album. Inside was a picture that made his heart skip, his 4 boys at a science fair, proudly showing off Williams' first coding project. They couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old. On the back, Anna had written, "Like father, like sons, but hopefully better." She had gotten her wish. They were better. They had taken his drive and ambition, but paired it with their mother's wisdom and integrity. With trembling hands, Robert picked up his phone and typed out a message to Thomas. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'd like to learn from you boys, if you'll let me. Not as a father giving advice, but as a man learning from the better men you've become." He stared at the message for a long time before hitting send. To his surprise, the response came within minutes. "Mom's engagement party is next Saturday. Paul suggested inviting you. Said it might be good closure for everyone. 2 p.m. at the old Italian restaurant near campus." Robert's throat tightened. The Italian restaurant, where he had proposed to Anna all those years ago. Where their story had begun, and where, perhaps, a new chapter could start. The week passed slowly. Robert spent it restructuring his company's ethical guidelines, using William's startup as a model. He donated most of his designer wardrobe, keeping only what he actually needed. Each change felt like shedding a layer of the man he'd become to rediscover the man he used to be. Saturday arrived cold and clear. Robert stood outside the Italian restaurant, wearing a simple suit, no designer labels, no flashy accessories. Through the window, he could see his family gathered inside. Anna looked radiant, her hand intertwined with Paul's. The boys were laughing at something, their faces bright with genuine joy. Before he could lose his nerve, Robert pushed open the door. The familiar smell of garlic and tomato sauce hit him, bringing back memories of happier times. The chatter at the table died down as people noticed his presence. Anna spoke first, her voice gentle. "You came." "Thank you for allowing me to be here," Robert said quietly. He looked at Paul, the man who had stepped up to mentor his sons when he had stepped away, "and thank you for suggesting it." Paul nodded, his kind face showing no trace of triumph or resentment. Family healing is never a bad thing. Robert turned to his sons, seeing in their faces a mix of caution and curiosity. "I know I can't undo the past 5 years, but I'd like to learn from them, if you'll let me." Thomas gestured to an empty chair. "We saved you a seat, just in case." As Robert sat down, William pulled out his laptop. "Actually, I've been wanting to show you something. Remember that ethical AI framework I developed? There's a component that could help your company's new direction." "Really?" Robert leaned forward, genuinely interested. "Tell me more." For the next hour, Robert listened more than he spoke. He learned about Thomas's young patients and their courage. He'd heard about Peter's plans to start a youth sports program in underserved communities. He discovered how Chris was using his legal training to protect small tech startups from corporate giants. And he watched with pride as William explained his vision for technology that helped people rather than exploiting them. Anna and Paul shared their own news, plans for a small wedding, their ideas for combining their teaching methods to help more students. Robert felt a pang seeing Anna so happy, but it was different now. Not the jealous ache of wounded pride, but genuine gladness that she had found someone worthy of her. As the afternoon wound down, Robert raised his glass of sparkling water. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to learning from those wiser than ourselves." His sons exchanged glances, then raised their glasses too. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Later, as they were leaving the restaurant, William hung back. "Dad," he said, the words sounding unfamiliar but not unwelcome, "we're having a tech ethics panel next month at my startup. Would you like to come? Not as a speaker, just to listen and learn." Robert felt tears prick at his eyes. "I'd like that very much." Walking to his car, Robert looked back at the restaurant one last time. Through the window, he could see his family, former wife, soon-to-be stepfather, and 4 remarkable sons, gathering their things, their faces relaxed and happy. They had built something beautiful without him, but maybe, just maybe, they were willing to let him learn how to build something new too. He touched the empty space on his finger where his wedding ring used to be. Some losses were permanent, some mistakes couldn't be undone. But as he drove away from the restaurant, Robert realized that true wealth wasn't in what you could gain, but in what you chose to give. Attention, respect, love, time. His sons had learned that lesson long ago, taught by a mother who chose dignity over bitterness and a stepfather who gave without expecting anything in return. Now it was his turn to learn, to grow, to become worthy of not just their forgiveness, but their respect. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be quick. But for the first time in 5 years, Robert Chen was on the right path, not because it led to more success or money, but because it led back to the things that truly mattered.